everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I'm going to be covering one of the most requested topics on my channel, and that is subspace. I have gotten so many questions over the years from people who want to know more about what causes subspace, what it feels like, what it is, and hopefully we're going to be getting to all of those questions in today's video. In fact, there is so much ground to cover when it comes to talking about subspace that I'm going to be breaking this down into two parts. So today's video is going to be all about what subspace is, explanations for subspace, what causes it, and how does it feel, and how to deal with it after you have ended a scene where you've gone into subspace. In my next video, I'm going to be going over some myths and misconceptions about subspace, and then also some risks to be aware of if you are interested in engaging in play that involves going into subspace. But like I said, there is a lot of ground to cover, so let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so let's start off with a good solid definition and talk about what is subspace. So for me, how I see subspace is as a distinct, noticeable, altered state of mind that is brought on through consensual BDSM play. Now, this is the one that I use because I think it is the one that most easily incorporates everybody's potential individual experience of what subspace is. However, there is not like some sort of scientific body out there that has devoted themselves to studying the science of BDSM and particularly the science of subspace. So it's not like we have good, repeatable, large sample size trials that we can go to say, here's exactly what subspace is. In fact, I have heard many explanations out there of all the different ways that people think that subspace happens. And I don't necessarily think that it is any individual one of these alone. For me, I consider them to be sort of guidelines for how you might be able to describe subspace. So some of the explanations that I have heard have been things like, for those who are interested in hypnosis, they will say that it is like being in a trance state. I have heard other people explain it like being in a deep meditative state. I've heard other people describe it like a runner's high or the adrenaline rush that you get from doing an extreme sport like base jumping. I have heard other people describe it as being like a state of flow. So that is when you are like really deeply invested in the moment and solely focused on the now. There are a lot of different ways that you can experience subspace, so I don't, again, necessarily think that it's any one of these alone that causes subspace. Rather, there are general categories and ways that subspace may be most similar to one of these, but that is very much up to your own individual experience. Subspace as well is a little bit of a misnomer. It's the most commonly used term, so it's going to be the one that I use in this video. But subspace is not necessarily strictly for those who use the term submissive to describe themselves. People who are a slave, or property, or littles, or pets, or rope bunnies, or switches who are playing as a submissive, or bottoms. Any of those people can experience subspace. Basically, all you really need to be doing is having some kind of consensual BDSM activity going on. Now, there is something on the top side that is a separate term that describes their experience, and that's normally called top space or dom space. And that is physiologically and psychologically enough different from subspace that I do keep them as separate terms. And if people are interested, I will do a separate video talking about dom space, but honestly, that one is even less understood, even though it is understood that it is a separate, unique experience, and that depending on what side of the BDSM experience you're doing, you are potentially going to have one of those two things. Now for the big question, what causes subspace? Now I kind of already given this away because I put it in the definition, but really all it needs to be is a consensual BDSM activity. Literally, potentially anything that is a BDSM activity could cause somebody to have this altered state of mind. There are sort of individual names that people will use for particularly different categories of play. So for example, if somebody is engaging in rope bondage when they have this experience, they may call it rope space. Somebody who is engaging in DDLG or CGL who has this experience may call it little space. Somebody who is a pet or a pony or a puppy or something, if they are having this experience, they may call it pup space. or pony space or pet space, depending on what their label is. But all of those terms, all of those different variants fall under the larger category of subspace because they are all just simply variants on the same sort of psychological, physiological thing that's happening in the body. Which brings me to my next point. I think the best way to think about what causes subspace is to break this up into two categories. There are the physiological causes of subspace and there are the psychological causes of subspace. These are not mutually exclusive from each other, and especially when you're doing scenes that have a lot of elements building on each other, it can be very difficult to discern exactly which of these two is the main cause, but very oftentimes they are mixed or overlapped in some way, and that is totally normal. This is not a black and white thing. I think the physiological response that causes subspace is the most well-known, and what I would sort of consider classic subspace to be are all of those physical things. The number one most common way would be through impact play, so that basically just means receiving pain. That could be from a spanking, a flogging, a caning, any sort of physiological pain. That is going to be in the physiological category of what causes subspace. Now, it doesn't have to strictly just be pain, but most people who regularly go into subspace will have some type of impact play scene that has sort of a nice bell curve effect to it, where it's a slow buildup, it reaches a peak, and through that the person is able to build up adrenaline or an endorphin response basically that causes them to go into a subspace state of mind, and then it slowly tapers off so the person is able to enter back into reality. I'm getting a little bit of my head of myself there, but that's basically why it's something that's so reliable. I think of all the forms of subspace, it's going to be the one you're going to hear about the most. It's going to be the one that is repeated the most because it does tend to follow a certain pattern for a lot of people. In terms of other physiological causes, I would say that rope bondage is going to be another big one because you're having that constriction. A lot of times if you're doing an inversion, the blood is going to your head. And so not only do you have the pain element from the rope potentially, but you also have all of the blood going straight to your head in this part of your body. And I think that as well could contribute to sort of more of the lightheadedness, the airiness that is oftentimes associated with subspace. Now, on the opposite side of this, you have the psychological causes of subspace, and I think this is the one that kind of gets maybe not necessarily neglected, but isn't talked about as much as a cause of subspace because it is more subtle. And this is basically anything that involves a deep psychological investment in what you're doing in the BDSM scene. So that could be something like humiliation play, that could be degradation, that could even potentially be sensory deprivation. It could also be things like role play, so again, like pet play, like DDLG or CGL. It could even be service. Those are all more of the psychological aspects of play. And again, these things do overlap. Almost any BDSM activity, if not every BDSM activity, is potentially something that for the right person could cause subspace. So one person could strictly be impact play only, one person could go into it whenever they're a human lamp, one person could go into it whenever they get out the crayon or the coloring books. It is totally a very unique and a very individual experience. So one of the pieces of advice that I would give for people who are interested in experiencing subspace is to add variety to their play, to try new things. If you get stuck in the rut of thinking this is what causes subspace, why isn't this working for me? Try something new, try new things, try a different environment. Subspace is a very temperamental thing. I did mention earlier that the physiological and especially impact play and especially the impact play based elements are the most reliable, but even that can completely be altered by things like if you're hungry or thirsty, if the room is the right temperature, if you feel comfortable in the clothing, did you have a good day at work? It's something that is very fickle and very difficult to predict. So again, just experimenting, trying new things can be a good way of figuring out what works for you if you are interested in trying to go into subspace. So we have all of these different things that can cause subspace, but what does it feel like? Again, this is going to be something where everybody has a very unique individual experience. Everybody's situation is going to be different, and even with the same person, with the same partner, the same activities, because there are so many variables involved, it is potentially going to be unique every time. However, there are a lot of overarching elements that a lot of people find are common to their subspace. Some people say that it's feeling floaty, that it's feeling fuzzy or out of your body. Other people say that it feels very disconnected from time, that you feel very just like focused and in the moment. You feel very relaxed, you feel free from anxiety. You know, the rest of the world melts away and the only thing that you're really experiencing is the pain. Other people will experience it where their pain tolerance just goes like whoop, and they're able to take pretty much as much pain as their partner is willing to give them. They just feel completely beyond anything that is happening to them. It's all just, you know, completely almost happening in the background. Other people will describe it as being very tranquil. Other people describe it as being very blissful, or blissed out is a common thing that you'll hear people talk about. It can be really laughy and giggly. It can be silly and fun. It can be something where the person goes like completely inside of themselves and they're just very tranquil and still and calm in that moment. It can feel like being very much again in that state of flow, of being focused, of being immediately right here and now. It can feel very much like you're in a state of zen. There are a lot of other things that go along with subspace too, not only in terms of feeling, but sort of how you're able to access the world as well. Oftentimes people will, again, lose their ability to fully sense the pain that they're actually receiving, and they'll feel kind of beyond it. And I'll cover this more in the video talking about the risks of subspace, but it can happen that you just completely like don't feel the pain at all, or you more recognize it but aren't aware of it as a negative sensation. Other people will describe sort of loss of time or loss of memory. They'll sort of have difficulty remembering the day after exactly what they experienced. They won't remember it all. Other people completely lose their ability to understand what's going around them. They don't know how to use language. They either speak and their words just come out like total word salad, incoherent. Other people, like, they can talk but they can't understand what anybody is saying, or they burst into a foreign language. A lot of things can happen when you're pouring that amount of chemicals into your brain, which is why it's important to be careful when you're going into subspace, but that is a different video for another time. So I think generally overall, what all of this is connected to is just really having an altered state of mind. It is often described as feeling high or blissed out or floaty, and if any of those terms connect to you, or maybe even if they don't, that is just how I would describe it. And again, it is a very individual experience. It does depend on the play that you're doing and you and your partner and your state of mind. So just be aware of this. Not necessarily a complete list, but those are the ways that it has most commonly been described to me. Now, let's talk about subdrop and ending a scene where you have entered into subspace. Now, everything is particularly risky, especially if you have not expected to go into subspace, and if it's a surprise, it's a surprise and it happens sometimes. But if you are consciously going into this, I think there are some things that you should be aware of. Number one, if you have gone into subspace, it takes a while for that experience to go away for a lot of people. There are a lot of residual effects that last for potentially up to even like 2 or 3 days after a scene. So number one thing you should do is make sure that you have a gradual cool down in the scene. It is the worst possible idea in the world I can think of to just suddenly drop somebody who's gone into subspace and be like, bye, see ya, I got another date. Because basically what happens if you're somebody who's confused, you're disconnected from reality, you can't really speak English, and suddenly the person who put you in this state is like gone, or all the sensation you were receiving suddenly totally goes away, your brain's going to be like, what the heck is happening here? And that can cause what was once a really, really good feeling to completely do a 360 and end up in a very negative, depressed, lethargic state, which is what you're trying to avoid. So the first step is to just make sure that you are having a gradual cool down to the scene. Make sure that you are giving yourself plenty of time to aftercare. I have lots of videos about aftercare, so please make sure you check the links down below. In general, for Subspace in particular, if you don't already have an aftercare plan that is consistent and works for you, I recommend making sure that you are hydrated, making sure that you have adequate food, so that means like protein and good carbs. Quick sugar can sometimes be good for people, but I recommend like good sustained nutrition. If all you have on hand is a Reese's peanut butter cup and chocolate and that makes you feel better, do it. But make sure you're giving yourself something for more sustained energy too if you need that. Having something warm is important as well. If it's a really hot day outside and it's the middle of August, probably don't need it. But if it's January, if it's a cold open dungeon, a lot of people do experience chills, so warmth is a good idea. Quiet and calm is also a good idea. If you are doing this in a big public dungeon where there's lots of screaming and shouting, and you've been able to kind of bliss out and be separate from that, and suddenly there's all of this noise and sound and music and lights and everything's everywhere, that could again cause stress. That could cause somebody to have their good state of mind suddenly go really bad. So having something like, something soft to hold on to, something comforting, even maybe having like just some earmuffs, something to kind of dampen the noise, or a light blindfold. I generally recommend, if you are using those things as part of your scene, to sort of remove those slowly, because again, it mitigates that shock factor of suddenly having to come back to reality. But everybody is individual. Everybody is going to have their own experience. So really, it's sort of up to you and your partner or your partners to come up with a plan that works for you, works for the kinds of play that you're doing, the time that you have, and the space that you're doing it in. So those are just some general guidelines to get started with. In terms of how long all of these feelings last and how long you're going to be in subspace for, it can vary a lot. I would say the high feeling of subspace itself, if it's really deep, it's going to be something that maybe lasts for even like an hour or longer after the scene. I find for myself, most commonly, if I am experiencing this, the most prevalent, the strongest symptoms, like the confusion, the loss of time, the loss of language, that's all going to be gone within an hour or two. Like maybe not feeling fully connected with reality, kind of being like, what's happening here? That tends to go away in about an hour or so, and I slowly kind of start to reconnect with reality, which is how I'm able to get access to a lot of those other things again. However, just because you have this nice long glowy feeling after the scene doesn't mean that your body's not going to crash, that your body hasn't been injured in some way. So part of what you should be doing when you are doing whatever aftercare routine works for you is make sure you address and check your physiological state. Bruises and things are normal, but are you limping? Are you having trouble breathing? Is there anything that would be a cause for medical concern? One of the big issues of subspace is because you are losing that ability to fully sense pain in a lot of cases, you can go farther than you normally would and cause yourself injury, so make sure you're checking that out. If you're worried about broken skin or bruising that's going to be lasting for a really long time, make sure that you take space to be able to address all of those things as needed. But the really big thing here is you can have that glowy feeling for like a day or two, maybe even longer after a scene is done. But even with the best aftercare, even with best practices, because of how much it basically like drains your body's reserves to have that really intense experience, sometimes it might not be until 2 or 3 days later, you can still drop. Aftercare is not a guarantee that bad things won't happen. It's basically trying to reduce the immediate worst effects of having a scene and hopefully mitigating anything that happens afterwards and making it less bad potentially. If you are experiencing subdrop after a subspace related scene, oftentimes that will present as irritability, feeling easily upset or angered. That will be things like crying easily. That would be things like feeling really lethargic, sleepy, run down, just kind of an overall sort of cruddy feeling. If you were doing something that was particularly emotionally or mentally intense, you could have experiences where you feel like very like self-negative, like you feel badly towards your partner, or you feel guilty about the scene that you did, you feel like a bad person because of the play that you've engaged in, just any sort of like negative, crummy feeling can really be something that is associated with subdrop after a scene. But if you do things like make sure you get rest, make sure you stay hydrated, a lot of those things can be reduced. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of feelings after subspace / subdrop would be some of the immediate physiological things that you should be looking for when you are coming out of subspace. Because sometimes for people, even if they have had that gentle transition, even if they, they're in their blankets, they've gotten their aftercare, they have their water, there can still be things physiologically that are happening that, depending on your own individual health, may or may not be something that's a cause for concern. So oftentimes people have an ongoing sense of dizziness or confusion. Again, some people have that time loss, that memory loss can be a concern for a lot of people. Sometimes they're shaking, people can sweat or they can feel really cold, they can have shivers. Those are all common things that happen once a scene is done. However, those effects, rather than the ones that I described earlier, like sort of the crappy lethargic feeling, those sort of symptoms like the shaking and the chills and everything, if those are happening, those usually go away within a couple of hours. If they persist for longer, if they seem particularly intense or unusual, or if you have some underlying medical condition and it's not responding to the standard treatment of water and rest and good food, then please do not hesitate to see your doctor. Please do not hesitate to see a medical professional. It would be unusual. It would not be something that I have personally experienced or known of. But if you do have something that's underlying, make sure you check it out with a doctor because it could be indicative of a larger issue. And it is always better to make sure that you're doing the best things for your body rather than taking unnecessary risks. So that is everything that I have to say about subspace. Whew. That was a lot, and I can't believe it. I have another part of even more information about subspace. Now, even though this is going to be like a 20-minute long video, this in and of itself is really not even going to be a totally comprehensive guide because, again, this is very personal. This is up to your own individual body, and always make sure you honor that. Honor the sensations you're having in your body. Honor the feelings you have in your gut. If something feels bad, it doesn't feel right, if you're going into a headspace that suddenly makes you feel really anxious or uncomfortable, don't force that. Don't try to make yourself go into subspace when it doesn't feel something that's like physiologically right to you. If you are going into a place where you're going to go into subspace and maybe that causes you to make riskier decisions or play at a level that you're not comfortable with, honor that. Honor yourself, honor your body, honor your partners. Your own self-check-in is really the most important tool here when it comes to identifying subspace and being able to go through it in a healthy and enjoyable way. Is check in with yourself after a scene, check in with your partners after a scene. I recommend keeping a diary or some kind of journal, especially the first few times you experience subspace, so you can kind of note your experiences and your revelations as time goes on. So, if day 1 feels one way and day 2 feels another way and day 3 feels another way, you can kind of keep track of that and kind of monitor yourself so you know for the future what to expect. You can tell your partner what to expect, and maybe you can improve your aftercare in ways so that way, negative feelings you're having or negative emotions aren't coming up to the same degree that they did the first time, because it's all about improvement and growth over time. Anyways, that is everything that I have for today's video. Again, not a comprehensive thing. If you guys have any comments or questions, if you want more resources, make sure that you let me know down in the comment section below. Check out the description box for more resources if you want to see more from me, and especially if you want to be able to check out the follow-up video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And finally, if you really enjoyed this video and you want to see more content from me, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. That is what allows me to make all of these videos, devote the research and the time to do this. It also allows me to offer you guys a lot of exclusive perks and rewards, so like more videos and photo shoots, all of that fun stuff. Do please check it out if you haven't already, and if you already support me, thank you so much, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.